All right, welcome to the Explainer. So today we're doing something a little different. We're not just looking at a story, we're basically analyzing its autopsy. We're going to dig deep into what's called the Inferno critique, this absolutely fascinating verdict on the hero Wotan. And get this, the verdict isn't delivered by some neutral narrator. Oh no, it comes from the very forces he was trying to defeat.
So, this quote right here, this is the heart of it all. This is the Inferno Council's opening salvo. They look at the entire story of Wotan the Overman, and they don't see a grand tragedy or some epic triumph. Nope, to them, it's just a mathematical error, a simple, predictable miscalculation. They're basically saying his whole quest was doomed from the start because his logic was completely off. So, let's break down exactly why they think that.
Okay, so Section 1, a verdict from the Ash Throne. And believe me, to get this verdict, you first have to understand the courtroom, because where this judgment takes place, well, it's not just a backdrop. It's the first piece of evidence against our hero.
So, just picture this scene for a second. We're at the top of the Tower of Inferno, which is literally a mountain made from the ash and wreckage of, quote, obsolete delusions. And down below, the judges are looking at Wotan's life's work. His emerald spire, this incredible symbol of growth and reaching for the heavens, it's been corrupted. Twisted into something called the Crimson Temple. It's a total failure. So yeah, this setting, it's not just a pretty picture. It's Exhibit A in their case against him.
And just who are these judges? Well, this is the Inferno Council, and you've got to understand these aren't your typical bad guys. Each one is the embodiment of a fundamental force of opposition. You've got Beelzebub, who represents entropy, decay. Then there's Lucifer, embodying resentment of anything high and noble. Satan, the pure adversary. And finally, Mephistopheles, the cold, calculating voice of logic itself. Each one of them is going to take a piece of Wotan's story and just tear it apart.
All right, on to Section 2, the flawed tools. This is the Council's first major critique, and it's a big one. They're basically arguing that the very tools, the very ideas Wotan used to build his entire worldview were broken from the get-go.
So, what was Wotan's big idea? At the core of his whole philosophy, he thought he could create a new kind of truth by mashing two huge concepts together. First, the wound of the Nazarene, this idea of drawing strength directly from suffering. And second, the laugh of Zarathustra, this kind of joyful defiance in the face of a meaningless universe. He thought he could fuse them into something powerful.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This is the core of the disagreement. You see, the council takes Wotan's two big ideas and they just flip them completely on their head. They say, that wound, it's not bleeding strength, my friend. It's bleeding mortality. It's tying you to a world that rots. And that laugh, that's not validation. That's irony. It's the cosmos telling you your whole struggle is a joke.
And Beelzebub, the Lord of Decay, he just nails it with this line. A god who bleeds for a tree is just a gardener waiting for winter. What he means is, the second Wotan connected himself to the physical world, he didn't become its master. He just became another part of it, subject to the same cycle of life and death as everything else. His failure was baked in from that moment. As they say, entropy doesn't have to fight you, it just has to wait.
So what about that laugh of defiance? Well, the council sent in their agent, the Jester, to prove a point. And the gesture showed everyone that the laugh wasn't Wotan mastering the abyss, it was the abyss laughing right back in his face. The ultimate punchline to this whole grand heroic struggle, nothing matters. Ouch.
Okay, let's move on. Section 3, the arrogance of isolation. Now this critique is all about strategy, and it zeroes in on what the council sees as Wotan's biggest mistake in how he dealt with, well, everyone else.
You have to remember Wotan's primary motivation here. He wasn't trying to save humanity. His goal was to surpass it. The source material calls this master morality. It's this idea that a truly exceptional person has to create their own values, totally separate from the common crowd, to become what they're meant to be.
But of course, the council sees it very differently. What Wotan called master morality, this noble act of rising above, they just call it arrogance. Simple, plain arrogance. And it turned out to be the fatal flaw, the exact opening they were looking for.
And this is the really clever part of their plan. See, they realized they didn't have to fight Wotan head-on. Why bother? They just weaponized the very people he chose to ignore. While he was up in his ivory tower building his spire, the council was down on the ground, whispering to the masses, giving them an easier path, telling them that giving up was actually the wisest thing to do.
And this quote from Lucifer just sums it all up, doesn't it? A sovereign without subjects is not a king.
He is a hermit in a god-sized cage. Wotan thought he was achieving this amazing, glorious isolation, but what he was actually doing by cutting himself off was building a prison. A beautiful, grand, god-sized prison with only one inmate.
Yeah, that idea of the god-sized cage, that leads us straight into Section 4. This is the third critique, and honestly, it might be the most devastating of all, because this one is pure logic, coming straight from Mephistopheles. So, Mephistopheles rolls out his masterstroke, something called the uncanny equation. And with this one theory, he just blows Wotan's entire claim to being special right out of the water. The equation basically proves that the great hero and the common person are exactly the same. Why? Because both are just building things to hide from the terrifying silence of a meaningless universe.
Look at it this way. It's two sides of the exact same coin. Wotan builds a giant spire to give his life meaning. The herd builds a religion to give their lives meaning. Both are just structures, right? Elaborate ways to avoid staring into the void, to hide from that silence where there's no built-in purpose.
And this was the jester's big reveal. He showed everyone that both structures, the spire and the religion, they're both just cages. The only difference is the scale. One is a fancy, custom-built cage for one person. The other is a big, communal cage for everyone. But a cage is a cage. They serve the exact same function, to keep reality.
And this line, this is the logical checkmate. We didn't have to lock the door. Wotan built the bars himself when he demanded meaning in a meaningless world. You see? The council didn't have to defeat him. His own desperate need for meaning in a world that doesn't offer any was the thing that trapped him. He forged the bars of his own prison with his own two hands.
Okay, so they've picked apart his philosophy, his strategy, even his claim to being unique. So what's the final judgment? Section 5. Gravity wins.
It really all comes down to this grand reckoning. The promise versus the result. Wotan promised a sovereign renaissance, right? A new dawn for everyone, led by a new kind of being. But what was the actual result? An age of darkness. The council argues that his flawed ideas and his epic arrogance didn't lead to a new beginning. They led straight to the opposite.
And in the end, their whole critique boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. Gravity always wins. And by gravity, they don't just mean the physical force. They mean entropy, mortality, the weight of the crowd, all the fundamental forces that pull things down. Their argument is that no matter how high an individual tries to fly for how long, those forces will eventually, inevitably win.
Which really leaves us with this huge, provocative question, doesn't it? Can the will of one single person, no matter how strong, really overcome the fundamental forces of the entire cosmos? It really makes you think about the limits of ambition, about how far individualism can take you when you're up against the cold, hard math of reality.
So, in the end, the Inferno Council just completely reframes the entire epic of Wotan. They say the story was never about how a man becomes a god. It's about how a god, or someone who thinks he's a god, is forced to realize he's just a man who forgot to die. It's not a story of a failed ascent. It's a brutal, tragic lesson in mortality, reminding him that he's subject to the exact same ending as everybody else.